Welcome to 8th House Portal. Today I wanted to touch upon the topic of what I call a fated crossroads. That point in a relationship where you know very well it needs to end, but you find excuses to keep staying. You try to justify why keeping it together is important. It's that point where you're in a life chapter where your identity, your purpose, and your sense of self are at a turning point. You start, or you may begin, to encounter or experience things that feel fated or significant for who you're becoming. You may be drawn to people or situations that reflect your next evolutionary step. You may be at a point where you're being challenged to live more in alignment with your deeper truth. You may seek to become more spiritually honest or emotionally authentic. It's that point where you let go of old masks or roles that were about pleasing others or maintaining a certain identity. You may have a sense that your future path has a bigger life direction. You might ask yourself, what future life do I really want? And you might also get to the point where you question, what stories about love and risk do I want to keep living? And which do I need to end? You might notice conversations that feel bigger than the surface topic. You might find that there's a type of pressure to define or reframe what connection means in the story of your life. And when you come to that crossroads, there's always a sense of loss that you might experience, because when you choose one path, you are by definition not choosing all the others. So you may have tension around that. When you're at that crossroads, you have to remember that some relationships arrive not to give us a neat story, but sometimes to force us to choose ourselves more honestly. And when you realize, when you're at that crossroads, that you need to choose a path, not the familiar one that's driving you insane, but when you choose the path that you're meant to, it's about letting something that you choose be sacred and meaningful without forcing it into a predetermined role. Allowing yourself and possibly the other person that comes into your life to evolve, rather than freezing the connection at one level or expectation. When you're at that crossroads, sometimes it might feel like a sense of fate, but not knowing what will come after that choice is made. Sometimes can feel like when your soul puts its hand on your shoulder and says, it's time. The guardian at the gate is asking you, what have you actually learned, and what will you no longer do? And as I've been doing in every episode, it seems, I have a story to try and put it into perspective in our current culture and time. When the dishes started drying themselves, that's when he knew something was wrong. Not literally, of course. They sat still in the rack by the sink, water beading and sliding off in slow motion. But that's how it felt to Ethan lately. Like his life was moving without his participation, routines running on muscle memory, while his actual soul hovered somewhere above, watching. He and Laura had been together for years. They shared a home, a Netflix account, joint savings plan labeled future. Their friends said things like, "You two are solid." They rarely fought. They split chores. They remembered each other's coffee orders. They were, by all visible measures, fine. Ethan rinsed another plate and set it in the rack. Lara was in the living room, folded into the corner of the couch. Laptop open, lit by the blue wash of some true crime documentary. The same as almost every Wednesday. He stared at his own reflection in the dark window above the sink. 35 now. Good job, decent salary. A plant on the windowsill he'd managed not to kill. And a quiet, growing terror in his chest that this was it. Not it as in happy ending. It as in the entire rest of his life scripted in advance. Same argument loops. Same way they both avoided the subjects that made the air go sharp and thin. He dried his hands and leaned on the counter, letting the thought he'd been dodging for months finally surface. If I stay, I'm choosing this version of myself forever. It wasn't that he didn't care for Lara. He did. He knew the small scar on her left wrist from falling off a bike at 9. He knew how she took her coffee and the exact order she watched comfort shows in. But somewhere along the way, he stopped bringing his whole self to the table. The parts of him that wanted more depth, more spiritual honesty, more risk, were like boxes stacked in a spare room no one went into. He could keep them there. They fit. They were tidy. They didn't cause trouble. Or he could open the door and face the mess. "Hey," Lara's voice floated in. "You okay in there? You've been staring at the sink for like 5 minutes." He shook himself, grabbed a towel, walked in. "Yeah, sorry," he said. "Just spaced out." He sat on the other end of the couch. The documentary narrated something about blood spatter. Lara laughed at the text from her co-worker. Ethan watched her profile, the familiar line of her nose, the way she always chewed the inside of her cheek when she was concentrating. There was affection. There was history. But there was also that other thing, the one he didn't want to name. Absence. Not hers, his. He felt like a ghost in his own relationship. Later, in bed, they lay side by side in the dark, phones dim above their faces. Lara scrolled, he pretended to. His thumb hovered over an email he'd drafted earlier that afternoon. It was an email to a therapist. He'd written 3 versions, deleted them all. "How do you write? I have nothing to complain about, and I'm quietly dying inside." He locked his phone and put it down. The ceiling fan hummed. Lara's breathing deepened into sleep. Ethan stared into the dark, heart knocking against his ribs like it was trying to alert someone. He whispered into the stillness, not quite a prayer, not quite an ultimatum. "I don't know what to do, but I know I can't unknow this. If I'm meant to stay, show me how to be fully here. If I'm meant to go, I need courage. I'm scared." Sometime after that, he drifted off. He dreamt of a train station. He was standing on a cold, high platform, breath white in the air. 2 trains were idling side by side. One was old, familiar, blue stripe along the side, coffee smell, the exact soft rumble he'd fallen asleep to hundreds of times. The other was sleek, silver, humming with a low, pulsing light. A disembodied announcement echoed, words blurring in that way dreams have. But he understood the gist. "Final boarding. Choose now." People moved around him, faceless, coats and bags in movement. His suitcase sat by his feet, heavy. He couldn't see what was inside, only felt the weight of it. Fear clamped around his throat. The familiar train door was opened, warm light spilling out. He could see a whole life there, same route, same stops, same jokes with the conductor, same view from the window, safe, predictable, known. He turned towards the silver train. Its windows were tinted dark. He couldn't see a thing inside. "Where does this one go?" he asked, voice small. No one answered. The announcement just repeated. "Final boarding. Choose now." His legs wouldn't move, his suitcase glued him to the platform. He thought of Lara, her laugh, the dinners at her parents' house where everyone talked about mortgage rates and vacation spots. He thought of something else too. Not a person, exactly. More like a version of himself he only met when he was alone. The part that listened to strange podcasts at 2 a.m. about soul contracts and past lives. The part that wrote things in the notes app he'd never dare say out loud. The part that sometimes imagined a woman he'd never met, someone with eyes that saw all the way through him and didn't flinch. The silver train vibrated under his feet, ready to leave. Ethan's heart pounded. He felt the panic rising, the urge to jump onto the familiar train just to make the awful choice go away. Instead, he did the only thing he could think of. He picked up his suitcase. His arm trembled with the effort. Every muscle screamed at him to put it back down, to pretend this moment wasn't happening. But he wrapped his fingers tighter around the handle and took one step toward the silver train. The second his foot left the platform, the dream went white. He woke up with his heart sprinting, sheets twisted around his legs. The bedroom was dark. The clock, a red 3:11 a.m. beside the bed. Lara snored softly next to him, back turned. The familiar ache of guilt arrived on cue. He lay there, chest heaving, and realized he was crying. Not the loud cinematic sobs, just quiet tears sliding into his hairline. He wiped them away and stared at the ceiling, the dream still vivid. Cold air, the weight of the suitcase, the soundless pressure of choose now. He knew enough about himself to recognize this wasn't just random. The dream didn't give him addresses or names, didn't flash the face of someone new, or show him lying in bed. It didn't tell him what the right answer was. It just put him on the platform and showed him his own paralysis. You cannot stand here forever, it seemed to say. Ethan exhaled, long and shaky. He didn't decide anything dramatic that night. He didn't make vows or reach for his phone. He didn't map out a breakup speech in his head. He just made one quiet agreement with himself. I will stop pretending I don't know I'm at a crossroads. In the weeks that followed, he started noticing how often he swallowed his real opinions to keep the peace, noticing how many evenings passed in parallel, scrolling instead of real conversation, noticing how his chest tightened whenever he imagined this exact routine 5, 10, 20 years from now. He emailed the therapist. He sat in a small office with bad carpeting and said, I'm scared to blow up something good because I want something I can't even name. He cried more than he wanted to. He learned that wanting more aliveness wasn't a moral failure. And slowly, over sessions and sleepless nights and awkward, halting talks with Lara, a different kind of honesty entered the room. It wasn't that one of them was wrong and the other right. It was that somewhere their paths had forked, and they'd been walking that split in silence. Months later, when they finally sat across from each other at the kitchen table and admitted out loud that staying together had begun to feel like slowly disappearing, there were tears. There was grief. There was also a strange, fragile relief, like exhaling after holding a breath for years. That night, Ethan moved his last box out of the apartment. He slept on a mattress on the floor of his new place. The room smelled like cardboard and fresh paint. He dreamt again. This time, there was no train, just a woman's face, half in shadow, half in light. He couldn't place where he'd seen her before. Maybe nowhere. She wasn't a specific person, just familiar in a way that bypassed logic. She looked at him with an expression that held both kindness and challenge. As if to say, now that you've stepped off the platform, what kind of man will you be? He woke up with the image still imprinted behind his eyes. Ethan didn't take it as a promise that she was coming, that she existed waiting somewhere with a sign that had his name on it. He took it as something else, a mirror of the part of him that was finally willing to let the universe rearrange what needed rearranging, instead of clinging to the known out of fear. He made his coffee in the half-unpacked kitchen, sunlight bleeding slowly across the new walls, and whispered into the quiet. Okay, I'm listening. I've moved. I'm here. Show me who I am now. And somewhere in that small, ordinary morning, between the kettle whistle and the first sip, he realized that the real crossing had never just been about leaving Lara. It had been about stepping back into his own life fully. Whatever and whoever came next would have to meet him there. In this story, you may have connected to the main character, or to his partner, or maybe to none of them. But I hope it gives everyone listening a sense of what it might feel like to be at that crossroads. Has anyone felt a time in their life where a relationship has forced major life choices? What did that feel like? I think that at this point in time, there are many people at a crossroads, whether it's relationships, career, what have you. Many of us are collectively at a crossroads, I think. But we'll try to keep it to just healing the wounded heart and relationships for today. Sometimes when you make that step, when you're at the crossroads, it could feel like you're being pulled onto a new timeline once you make that decision. That destiny bell ringing, being asked, who are you really now? And which path matches who you are becoming? It can feel like a fated high-pressure moment where your path is being rerouted by destiny and also tested for integrity. When we bring up the alchemical process, what is that really? It's the transformation of matter. It's a metaphor for transformation of your consciousness, where your identity is being purified, possibly, depending on which stage you're in. So I think what I'll do is go through the alchemical process and connect it to this theme of being at the crossroads and your self-identity. Because what tends to happen when we leave a relationship is some of us can be very lost. You don't know who you are once you lose that other person, but you know you've got to leave them. Once you finally admit which path you have to take, you can have a sense of both that feeling of destiny and a sense of powerlessness. Every part of you might want clarity in a label, a yes or a no, but you will not get it, not yet. I know what that feels like. thinking you can control everything, you get to a point where you realize you have no control. It doesn't matter what you do. That crossroads you get to is what we call Nigredo, the place where old certainties are burnt off. Your job is not to escape the blackness, but to stay conscious inside it. When you're at that crossroads, that place where old certainties are burned off, it doesn't happen gently or symbolically, but it happens thoroughly. So anything hiding in the corners, behind the door, the curtain, it will get burnt off. Everything that is not needed. Most people believe the task here is to escape the blackness, to think their way out, to spiritualize their way out, or to replace it with hope too quickly. But the work of Nigredo is not to escape. The work is consciousness. And to stay conscious inside Nigredo means you do not numb or rush or narrate yourself out of the experience. You do not demand meaning before it is ready to appear. But you remain present while the structures that once told you who you were are dissolving. It's easier said than done, isn't it? To remain conscious within that darkness. But consciousness does not equal control. And this is what I'm having to learn over the last few years. To remain conscious and witness without dissociation what's happening. Nigredo is like realizing you're inside a dream, but not a lucid one. You cannot change the setting. You cannot summon an exit. You cannot wake yourself up by force. All you can do is notice. And in ordinary life, when pain arrives, we try to regain control. In Nigredo, control is not available, but awareness is. And just as in a dream, the moment you stop fighting the experience and start observing it, you'll notice subtle shifts. You are still inside the dream, but it no longer consumes you whole. And I'm saying all of this, but it is quite difficult to do this. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm still learning. I'm still learning to see myself as in the third person, I guess, as a stranger. That's a whole other meditation I might talk about later. But when you are no longer consumed whole, that will help avoid false promises. And it doesn't claim mastery, only non-collapse. And staying conscious inside the blackness means you let grief speak without becoming it. You let fear rise without obeying it. You let the old self die without rushing to create a new one. If we remember Persephone and Hades, Persephone does not escape the underworld. She becomes conscious within it. She learns its rhythms, its laws, its seasons. And because she remains present there, she returns not as a girl, but as a queen. She doesn't try to bypass the darkness. She integrates it, and she is able to be a part of both worlds. I don't know if you remember the myth of Orpheus. He went to get his true love from the underworld, remember? He descended into the underworld, and he was told not to look back at his love. He looked back, of course, out of doubt and fear. And Orpheus fails not because he loved too much, but because he could not remain conscious in uncertainty. He needed reassurance, confirmation, and the moment he turned back, the work was undone. Because you see, turning back is returning to old certainty. And consciousness requires tolerating not knowing. There's a place in the love story where the universe refuses to give you a spoiler. Doesn't matter how you try to figure out what the next chapter is or the next book of your life. It is walking into that unknown and allowing what is meant to happen to unravel. For anyone listening, is there a time that you were at a crossroads, a moment that you didn't know the outcome, but in the end it changed you? Share that if you'd like. I definitely remember a time that I was pulled into a situation that had nothing to do with me. And let's just say it led to a whole other realm of things I had never imagined I would have to experience. And I went into that not knowing anything. And I definitely came out a changed person. Some of the experiences in life really do affect us in a way, but I would say that the specific experience I'm thinking of that changed me, thank goodness it changed me in a good way. It made me a stronger person, mentally, emotionally. It also helped me understand the different environments that people dwell in, different reality from my own. So that phase, that stage of Nigredo, where everything is burnt off, everything that is not needed is removed, while hopefully you stay conscious within that darkness. And then the second stage of alchemy, Albedo, the whitening, washing away the purification, separating the gold from the rest of the nonsense. The stage where we begin to see clearly, but we're not yet fully embodied. When we're at that crossroads of a relationship, Albedo is that separating, distinguishing between fantasy, fear, projection, true soul-level resonance and learning. In this point, the clarification or the purification stage, you have to ask yourself, what is your duty to yourself? What is structurally aligned? What is mature love for you? Not just longing. Which stories about love and joy are outdated? Are you still addicted to drama or impossible love as a way to feel alive? Everything will get washed through this discernment filter in this stage. If you have a longing, what is that longing asking you to embody, regardless of outcomes? You could also think of it as, at this stage, what truth about who I am in love is being revealed here? Then you have the third stage of alchemy, Citrinitas, the yellowing, awakening of the inner light, the integration of the new understanding, but still not yet embodiment. You'll probably ask yourself in this stage, what identity are you shedding? What self or soul-based self are you choosing? When you're at the crossroads in relationship, this stage of alchemy is kind of like moments of sudden inner knowing that have nothing to do with external proof. You can already feel the version of you that has already started to integrate lessons learned. You may get sudden awakenings of what real love feels like, or realizations of how your past patterns with romance have kept you small, distracted, or stuck. So for those listening, what glimpses of Citrinitas do you feel, if you've ever been there, or if you are there right now? Is there a clearer version of yourself that's starting to emerge? Maybe you can ask yourself that question when you get to that point. Sometimes, another way of thinking of it, sometimes when a person arrives in your life, they can arrive at exactly the moment that your old story is crumbling. They may be the symbol of the path that we're invited to step onto. Citrinitas, when we're talking about love, can be when we start to see that other person not only as an object of desire or fear, but as a mirror of the next version of ourselves. You can ask yourself in this stage, how has the previous connection that I had, that I'm leaving, revealed a kind of love or spiritual path that now feels non-negotiable? In the last episode, I shared a little secret about the King Arthur archetype that I hold as my new standard. Those are things that I kind of revealed to myself when I really sat down to think about non-negotiables, right? When I'm talking about being at a crossroads, I'm not talking about going back to the familiar. Because if you've already had questions in your mind about the current relationship you're in, that's usually a big sign already. For most people, not everyone, but that familiarity that keeps you stuck. And then the fear of the unknown, like we keep talking about. So I always think that when you get to this point, you don't have to force anything, but when you get to that point of whether it's Nigredo or Citrinitas, at some point, write down your non-negotiables. When you finally decided to cross and choose a path, what will you no longer compromise if you continue to seek that other person in your life? And then you have Rubedo, the fourth stage of alchemy, the completion or the integration, the embodiment, where the work isn't theoretical any longer, it's what you live. And in terms of being at the crossroads, this stage would be how you'll conduct yourself in love from now on. You're definitely not going to continue repeating old patterns. You're going to step into a new pattern with clearer boundaries, being more honest with yourself. And being honest with yourself can be very difficult for some people, especially in love. You have to sit with yourself sometimes, and in that silence, are you going to have less tolerance for confusion? Are you going to continue allowing emotional self-abandonment? You have to step into the consequences of the choices you now make. Whatever you choose, the partner, your path, your identity, that has fate that will shape the next book of your life. You can ask yourself in this stage, or you can say to yourself, I am ready for a love that meets me at this level of clarity and depth. In Rubedo, the alchemy of love is when the crossroads stops being about one particular person and becomes about your entire life field. It's that moment you choose that you will not lie to yourself anymore in love. You will not dim what you feel or know just to keep a comfortable story going. And that you will honor the sacredness of what you feel, whether or not it's ever reciprocated in the way that you imagined. And then you live from there. that stone in your chest will start to feel like gold when you live authentically and honestly. When you stop living inside a lie, even a beautiful one or a socially rewarding one, something in the world seems to recognize you for the first time. Paths you weren't searching for begin to open. Encounters arrive without any effort, and people appear who speak a language you didn't know you knew. Not because you called them in, but because you finally made yourself visible. And whatever comes next will meet you where you stand. And sometimes what meets you there is a life or a love or a future you could never have imagined. Because you were not yet the one back at the beginning, right? The beginning stages of the process who could receive it. But once you finally make that step, that choice in the crossroads, you'll come to the point where you can finally receive all of these things that are waiting for you on the other path that you were afraid to take. Now you can sit down with this and think about where you're at if you're at this crossroads yourself, or maybe you know somebody who is. You can think about the 4 stages of alchemy. How does Nigredo show up in your thoughts or your body or your dreams? What glimpses of Citrinitas do you feel? Do you see a clearer version of yourself emerging? Some of you might be at that stage already. What I think is always good when you're in a place like the crossroads is having a journal, a notebook dedicated to where you write your rawest wishes. Okay, write down what that wish is, and then underneath that, question what that wish really is pointing to. What is it within you that wants to be lived, whether or not this person is the one who joins you there? When you write down a wish in that book, what's really behind that wish? You could also try to meditate. You can visualize standing at a crossroads at night, allowing the darkness or the fog, the not knowing, the feeling that the ground beneath you is it's stable, even though the future is misty. And just remember that the mystery is not punishment, it's the vessel. Visualization is a great way of trying to comprehend certain things. Another thing you could put into action is making one concrete choice, one embodied choice that reflects your new truth. If you're at the end of those stages of alchemy and you've already chosen a path and you know very well which path you have to take, when you're ready to go into the unknown, make a choice that reflects your new truth. Whether it's ending a half-hearted connection or initiating a conversation that you've been avoiding. Maybe you want to start a creative or spiritual practice. But I would invite those listening, if you are in that point, in that stage, to make one concrete choice that reflects your new truth, or initiate that conversation that you've been avoiding. Stop the connections that don't fully meet you where you are or where you're going. Please share your comments, questions, and share your experiences if any of you are at these crossroads. Until next time, take care.